use the -F option. The tail -F option, -F just stands for follow. So this, what it does is it follows the progress of some log in real time. So if I do this to var log messages, you'll see a whole bunch of messages come out, 10 just like before. Except now, notice I don't have a command prompt here. And that's because if something new got written to that log, it would get written to my screen right here as soon as it got written to the log. Okay, let me show you how this works firsthand. I'm going to open up a new terminal here and just slide it off to the side. And what I'm going to do in this new terminal is just become the super user. Okay, that's a way that you get a log entry in there. So I'll do this and hit enter, but keep your eye back here on the screen, because when I hit enter, there's going to be a new entry in that log file. So I'll do that, and oh, and I actually typed the incorrect password, but still, you see authentication failure, log name Perry, who was trying to gain access to a super user. Okay, right there. Okay, so he was trying to become he was trying to switch user to be root, but there was an authentication failure. That showed up as soon as it happened in real time. As soon as I hit enter here, boom, it got written to varlog messages and it got displayed to the screen. So this is a nice way. The tail -F option is a nice way to just keep track of some log. You don't have to keep saying tail messages, tail messages, tail messages. You just do this once and you can watch when new errors come in. If you're trying to track something down that's happening right now, this is the way to do it. Okay, let me clear out of here and quit being the root user. And now we're back in the Perry account. And what I've gotten here now that I want to show you is this file called messages. That's just a piece of somebody's varlog messages log that I pulled off the internet. And the reason we're looking at this person's messages file instead of mine is because mine's not that interesting. Like all my hardware is working, knock on wood, and all that's working right now. I don't really have any really interesting error messages in my log files, and so I just pulled somebody else's off the internet to look at. Okay, I guess I just don't feel like sticking a screwdriver in my disk drive just to show you some interesting error messages. So what we got here is we got an error message. You see over here by the time 12:06:59, 12:07:59, 12:08:08, and so on. Okay, so this is this is the error log. It's happening very frequently. And what is it? What can we tell what it is? Well, it's pretty hard to tell, right? For an inexperienced user, you might have a hard time just figuring out what the heck is going on here. Well, one thing you can discern is like an ATA device is like an IDE device. So this is some kind of a disk drive, an IDE disk drive, and some write command is having a timeout. It's not succeeding, so they're resetting the devices. What's happening? Well, what's happening here is that some disk drive is failing, or some connector for the disk drive is failing. And if I saw this error message, the first thing I would do is mess with the cables and see if I can get the error to stop. So maybe I would, tail the messages file, do the tail -F on varlog messages, and see if I can hold the cables in if I think something's loose. Maybe I can hold it in and say I hold it in for like 3 minutes and no errors come up in the 3 minutes that I'm holding it. Well, then that would tell me that there's some kind of a bad connector or a bad cable involved, and I would just work to replace that or get a new plug for it or whatever. Okay, but if I hold it in or I mess with the cables and the errors keep coming up at once a minute or whatever they're coming up at now, then I know that it's really the disk drive that's failing, and I would be on the phone ordering a new disk drive and backing up all my important data that hasn't been backed up yet. Okay, so this is some error message. It's kind of a classic one. The problem here is that an inexperienced user wouldn't necessarily know this, and that's where you should use, the user groups, post to the news groups and say, hey, here's a little piece of my messages log file. I don't know what's going on. Can somebody tell me? And somebody out there will tell you what's going on. Just provide them with enough information. Make sure you tell them what version of Linux you're running, whether it's Red Hat or Mandrake, and also what version you're running, and what your messages file is, and try and give them some background that you think might be relevant, and people will be out there to help you out. Now let's talk about what you need to do if your system doesn't boot up. Okay, first let's talk about how to understand what's wrong with your system, and then we'll talk about how to recover from that. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is just show you, the LILO error codes, and you can find these all over the place. I'll just search in Google. I found them a little while ago. I search for LILO error codes or something like that. Okay. Now, if we search for LILO error codes, here's the first page: LILO boot error codes. And basically, what LILO boot error codes are is it's like some piece of the LILO loader. Okay. So when LILO loads itself, it displays the word LILO, and each letter is printed after some action has taken place. Okay. So if the whole word fails to print, then something is wrong in the process. All right, so here's a summary of this. If nothing gets outputted, that means no part of Lilo has been loaded. If just the L has been output, that means the first stage has been loaded, but it can't load the second stage of the bootloader. Okay. Now sometimes there's a 2-digit error code here to indicate the type of problems, and usually this indicates a media failure, which just means like your disk isn't working, something's wrong with your disk, or a geometry mismatch. And what that means is like the disk just is laid out differently than the system is expecting. Maybe the disk was on some different system and you like took it out of one system and you tried to use it on a different system, and that can cause problems, these geometry mismatch problems. You can also see here LI means the first stage was able to load the second stage, but it failed to execute it. Again, geometry mismatch, or moving the boot/boot.b file, okay, without running the map installer. I'll get to that in a minute. Then there's LIL question mark, LIL minus, and then finally Lilo, which says everything's been loaded successfully. So depending on what you're doing here, like all these LI, LIL, LIL question mark, all of these files or all these descriptions here, basically what they have to do with is that you change something or you moved some file. Okay, and Lilo does not automatically recover data from changed configuration files. It doesn't look at those configuration files when it starts up. Remember, we were talking before that when you restart a program, it reads its configuration files. Lilo doesn't do that. To get Lilo to take those changes, to read those changes, you have to run the Lilo command, LILO. You run that command, and then you can make those changes permanent. All right, so Lilo does not read lilo.conf every time it starts up, and instead you've got to run it explicitly before you shut down your system. Okay, and that's a big issue with Lilo. But the bad part of that is, right, it's a tough error to recover from. It's not that tough, but you have to be prepared for it to boot your system without using Lilo. So let's get to that now. So let me explain to you how to boot without Lilo. If Lilo's the only problem, like you've moved some files around and you changed some configurations, and Lilo's not working anymore, then what you can do is you can boot with an alternative program like loadlin. Now loadlin runs under DOS, but it can also boot Linux. So what you need to run loadlin, or to get it to boot your Linux image, is you need a DOS boot floppy, you need a copy of loadlin.exe, and you need a copy of your Linux kernel. Typically that's called vmlinez, and it's in your /boot directory. So you get all this on a floppy, okay, and then what you can do is you boot DOS, and then you run loadlin, you give the name of your kernel, vmlinez, and then you give the root directory on your hard disk. Okay, the device that holds the root directory. So here I've said root equals dev SDA1, maybe it's HDA3 on your machine, whatever it is, whatever holds the root partition there, you give that device. And now what's going to happen is this kernel image is going to be running, and this root file system is what it's going to use to, for all of its configuration settings and so on. Once you have access to this now, what you can do is you can go in and make the changes that to Lilo that you need to. You make the changes to lilo.conf, or you move the files around to where they should be, or whatever you need to do, and then when you shut down and reboot, Lilo should kick in and work correctly if you did everything right here. Okay, so this is your way to get in, get a copy of Linux running, and get access to your system again. Now, like I said, this works great if Lilo's the issue. But if your disk is corrupted or something like that, you need to take more extreme measures. You need to have an emergency boot disk around. And you should always have one of these around anyway. A lot of times these come with your distribution. Depending on the distribution of Linux that you got, you might have an emergency boot disk as part of it. You can certainly download emergency boot disks off the web. If you go to www.linux.org/dist for distribution, you can find all sorts of distributions in there. If you search for minimalist, they have this little search criteria there. If you search for minimalist distributions, you'll see a whole bunch of distributions that like fit on a floppy or two, and basically you can get those to boot up Linux and supply all the necessary stuff that you need to boot Linux, and then also recover your recover your disk. If your disk is corrupted, you can get some tools working on that to make it so that you can actually boot your system off the hard disk again. Noteworthy in this whole bunch of minimalist distributions is the one that's Tom's root boot disk. It's just Tom's RTBT. So this is Tom's root boot disk, has all sorts of stuff on it. Basically, the tools that you want on an emergency disk are things like drivers, a text editor like VI because it's really small, F disk so that you can look at disk problems and repair